Chapter 11, Part 2 of How I Found Livingstone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beth Ann. How I Found Livingstone: Travels, Adventures, and Discoveries in Central Africa, including 4 months' residence with Dr. Livingstone. By Sir Henry M. Stanley. Chapter 11, Part 2. Through Ukawendi, Uvinza, and Uha, to Ujiji. On the 29th we left our camp, and after a few minutes we were in view of the sublimest, but ruggedest, scenes we had yet beheld in Africa. The country was cut up in all directions by deep, wild, and narrow ravines, trending in all directions, but generally toward the northwest, while on either side rose enormous square masses of naked rock, sandstone, sometimes towering and rounded, sometimes pyramidal, sometimes in truncated cones, sometimes in circular ridges, with sharp, rugged, naked backs, with but little vegetation anywhere visible, except it obtained a precarious tenure in the fissured crown of some gigantic hilltop, whither some soil had fallen, or at the base of the reddish ochre scarps which everywhere lifted their fronts to our view. A long series of descents down rocky gullies, wherein we were environed by threatening masses of disintegrated rock, brought us to a dry, stony ravine, with mountain heights looming above us 1,000 feet high. This ravine we followed, winding around in all directions, but which gradually widened, however, into a broad plain, with a western trend. The road, leaving this, struck across a low ridge to the north, and we were in view of deserted settlements where the villages were built on frowning castellated masses of rock. Near an upright mass of rock over 70 feet high, and about 50 yards in diameter, which dwarfed the gigantic sycamore close to it, we made our camp, after 5 hours and 30 minutes continuous and rapid marching. The people were very hungry. They had eaten every scrap of meat and every grain they possessed, 20 hours before, and there was no immediate prospect of food. I had but 1.5 pounds of flour left, and this would not have sufficed to begin to feed a force of over 45 people, but I had something like 30 pounds of tea, and 20 pounds of sugar left, and I at once, as soon as we arrived at camp, ordered every kettle to be filled and placed on the fire, and then made tea for all, giving each man a quart of hot, grateful beverage, well sweetened. Parties stole out also into the depths of the jungle in search for wild fruit, and soon returned laden with baskets of the wood peach and tamarind fruit, which, though it did not satisfy, relieved them. That night, before going to sleep, the Wangwana set up a loud prayer to Allah to give them food. We rose betimes in the morning, determined to travel until food could be procured, or we dropped down from sheer fatigue and weakness. Rhinoceros tracks abounded, and buffaloes seemed to be plentiful, but we never beheld a living thing. We crossed scores of short steeps, and descended as often into the depths of dry, stony gullies, and then finally entered a valley, bounded on one side by a triangular mountain with perpendicular sides, and on the other by a bold group, a triplet of hills. While marching down this valley, which soon changed its dry, bleached aspect to a vivid green, we saw a forest in the distance, and shortly found ourselves in cornfields. Looking keenly around for a village, we descried it on the summit of a lofty triangular hill on our right. A loud exultant shout was raised at the discovery. The men threw down their packs and began to clamor for food. Volunteers were asked to come forward to take cloth, and scale the heights to obtain it from the village at any price. While 3 or 4 sallied off, we rested on the ground, quite worn out. In about an hour the foraging party returned, with the glorious tidings that food was plentiful, that the village we saw was called Weld Nzogera's, the son of Nzogera, by which of course we knew that we were in Uvinza, Nzogera being the principal chief in Uvinza. We were further informed that Nzogera, the father, was at war with Lukunda Mira, about some salt pans in the valley of Malagarazi, and that it would be difficult to go to Ujiji by the usual road owing to this war. But, for a consideration, the son of Nzogera was willing to supply us with guides, who would take us safely by a northern road to Ujiji. Everything auguring well for our prospects, we encamped to enjoy the good cheer, for which our troubles and privations, during the transit of the Ukawendi forests and jungles, had well prepared us. I am now going to extract from my diary of the march, as, without its aid, I deem it impossible to relate fully our various experiences, so as to show them properly as they occurred to us; and as these extracts were written and recorded at the close of each day, they possess more interest, in my opinion, than a cold relation of facts now toned down in memory. October 31st, Tuesday. Our road led east northeast for a considerable time after leaving the base of the triangular mountain, whereon the son of Nzogera had established his stronghold, in order to avoid a deep and impassable portion of marsh that stood between us and the direct route to the Malagarazi River. The valley sloped rapidly to this marsh, which received in its broad bosom the drainage of 3 extensive ranges. Soon we turned our faces northwest, and prepared to cross the marsh, and the guides informed us, as we halted on the eastern bank, of a terrible catastrophe which occurred a few yards above where we were preparing to cross. They told of an Arab and his caravan, consisting of 35 slaves, who had suddenly sunk out of sight, and who were never more heard of. This marsh, as it appeared to us, presented a breadth of some 100 yards, on which grew a close network of grass, with much decayed matter mixed up with it. In the centre of this, and underneath it, ran a broad, deep, and rapid stream. As the guides proceeded across, the men stole after them with cautious footsteps. As they arrived near the centre, we began to see the unstable grassy bridge, so curiously provided by nature for us, move up and down in heavy, languid undulations, like the swell of the sea after a storm. Where the 2 asses of the expedition moved, the grassy waves rose a foot high, but suddenly one unfortunate animal plunged his feet through, and as he was unable to rise, he soon made a deep hollow, which was rapidly filling with water. With the aid of 10 men, however, we were enabled to lift him bodily up, and land him on a firmer part, and guiding them both across rapidly, the entire caravan crossed without accident. On arriving at the other side, we struck off to the north, and found ourselves in a delightful country, in every way suitable for agriculturists. Great rocks rose here and there, but in their fissures rose stately trees, under whose umbrage nestled the villages of the people. We found the various village elders greedy for cloth, but the presence of the younger son of Nzogera's men restrained their propensity for extortion. Goats and sheep were remarkably cheap and in good condition, and, consequently, to celebrate our arrival near the Malagarazi, a flock of 8 goats was slaughtered and distributed to the men. November 1st, striking northwest, after leaving our camp and descending the slope of a mountain, we soon beheld the anxiously looked for Malagarazi, a narrow but deep stream, flowing through a valley pent in by lofty mountains. Fish-eating birds lined the trees on its banks. Villages were thickly scattered about. Food was abundant and cheap. After travelling along the left bank of the river a few miles, we arrived at the settlements recognizing